Hello and thank you for joining us. My name's Ben Sheen, I'm part of Stratfor's editorial team, and with me today is Europe Analyst Adriano Bosoni to talk a little bit about the current state of play in Europe. So, Adriano, we have multiple crises ongoing in Europe at the moment, and a lot of people are saying that actually some of the core foundational aspects of the Union are being called into question. What exactly are we seeing at the moment?
If you take a look at the events of 2015, you will notice that maybe from a financial point of view, it was not nearly as severe as it was in 2011, where Portugal, Spain, Ireland were getting bailouts. But if you take a look at the event from a political point of view, you will notice that it was probably the worst year in Europe since the crisis began. The year was shaped by two main events. During the first half of the year, we had the Greek crisis, and during the second half of the year, we had the immigration crisis. And both were very harmful for key principles of the European Union. During the negotiations over the Greek bailout, we saw the German finance ministry saying that Greece should be temporarily kicked out of the Eurozone, sending the signal that the common currency is not irreversible, as some EU officials have said. And during the second half of the year, because of the migration crisis, we saw countries putting border controls in place, challenging the continuity of the Schengen agreement in Europe. So this entire idea of Europe as a continent where citizens can move freely and tourists can move freely from one place to another has been challenged.
And these are some of the core foundational concepts behind the Union, the free movement of people and a common currency. How do you see this playing forward into 2016? Because there are a number of key things we expect next year, not least of which is the UK referendum on whether to remain part of Europe.
Well, the British push for a reform of the European Union will be one of the most significant events next year. And we will see the British government gaining support from different group of countries according to different topics. The UK will, for instance, push for a protection for non-Eurozone countries against measures that could involve members of the Eurozone. And that will be supported by the likes of Poland or the Czech Republic or Hungary. But at the same time, the UK will try to limit access to welfare benefits for EU citizens, and that will not be supported by countries in Central and Eastern Europe, but maybe it will be supported by countries in Northern Europe. So it will be complex negotiations, but I think that the EU is interested in keeping the United Kingdom in the EU, and there will be some accommodation, but that will open the door for an entire rethinking of how the EU works. And I think the days where member states were looking for an ever closer union and looking for a federal Europe are gone. Before the crisis, the main goal was to save the EU by deepening the process of continental integration. Now they will try to save the EU by reversing some aspects of continental integration.
And that's a fairly significant switch, and a lot of the stresses that we've seen this year, they're not going to go away. How do you see the migration crisis continue to exert that pressure on Europe, possibly forcing some of these divides and fractures?
We saw that the EU reached an agreement with Turkey in decisions and policies to try to prevent people from entering the EU. But that's not going to solve the crisis. I think it's a wrong approach to try to think of when the crisis will be solved. Because as long as there is a civil war in Syria, people will continue to try to make it first to Turkey and then to the EU. And this is not going to go away. Next year, however, we will see more border controls in place. We will see more people being stuck along the route, and that's why we have said here at Stratfor that we should be looking at the Balkans, because we will see border controls in the Greek-Macedonian border, we will see controls in the Serbian borders, we will see controls in Croatia, Slovenia, and other countries. So there is a chance that migrants will be stuck and become involuntary immigrants in a place they didn't want to go in the first place. And we are talking about regions which already have unemployment problems, political problems, ethnic tensions. So the prospect of a bottleneck along the Balkan route is one of the key developments we will be watching in 2016.
So how about economically? How do you see the economic situation playing out for the Eurozone and the European Union?
From a macroeconomic perspective, we will continue to see the effects of low oil prices and the policy of intervention in bond markets by the European Central Bank somewhat mitigating the crisis. Growth will return at a macro level to the EU. But interestingly enough, we will see governments in Portugal, Spain, Italy going back to their old ways of spending. We have a fragile socialist government in Portugal who has promised to reverse some of the austerity measures. We will probably see a fragile coalition government in Spain, which will try to reverse some of the policies that were implemented over the past 4 or 5 years. We see the government in Italy challenging the EU Commission and saying that it will spend more and will give more tax breaks to people. So we will not see a massive financial crisis. It will look nothing like 2011, but we will see these countries going back to their old ways and to the kind of behavior that led to the crisis in the first place.
So clearly interesting times ahead economically. And one final thing I wanted to ask you about was politically, what do we expect? Because there are no major elections next year, but certainly we're starting to see some alarming political trends ahead of 2017, where there will definitely be a shift in Europe.
The two countries to watch next year will be the traditional ones, France and Germany, because it's going to be the final year before they hold general elections in 2017. And we have seen conservative forces gaining ground in both countries. The French presidential election will be a competition between the center-right and the far-right. And in Germany, we have seen conservative forces pushing the government to take more nationalist stances. So it's going to be a transition year, and the key year will be 2017, when the two largest economies in Europe hold general elections.
Gosh, well, certainly plenty to look for in Europe next year. Adriano, thank you so much for taking the time to go through this today. Thank you. For more on this topic and many more associated with Europe and the world in general, please continue to read stratfor.com.